1, 2, 3. I can hear you fine. Just pass on the message to Harvey that I'm on, and I just sent him an attachment.
Okay, great. I'll tell him.
Okay, bye. David? Hi, Harvey.
Hey, Jim.
David's trying to get on, I think.
All right.
It looks like it. How was your rally?
It was good. Had my press pass.
I know, I see that. Were you able to meet up with Ken?
No, I didn't see Ken.
Okay.
There were a lot of people there.
Well, good.
So I wouldn't have recognized him, but
no.
I asked somebody if they knew if he was there, but they weren't sure who he was.
Okay. All right. Good.
Mostly saw a lot of great indigenous women talking.
Well, good.
Well, the subject was clips of them.
Fuels. The subject was fossil fuels, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be it all week. Tomorrow's the Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yep.
That's going to be the biggest, most exciting one, I think.
Yeah, probably so.
Well, I haven't had a lot of time to learn the AUKUS stuff, but you sent me an email.
I did send you an email. I've been collecting notes for a long time, but yesterday, day before, Friday, Saturday, and today, going through there's a ton of stuff out there, and there is a lots of disparate views. Well, actually not disparate. Pretty much everybody is thinking this is a problem. Hello, David.
It's like magic. If you turn on your video, people believe you're really there. How are you guys?
Good.
That's great. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks for inviting Allison. Now I'm going to refer to her as Dr. Timeout. Broinowski.
Sounds about right. You can ask her.
Okay.
She says it. Sounds right to me. Yeah, I figure we should have somebody from Australia rather than me telling you how people from Australia think. So hopefully she'll show up and do that.
I was really when you forwarded her name and I looked her up, I'm thinking, holy cow, we have a foreign service person for Australia since 1963. She's not only been all throughout the Pacific, Asian Pacific area, but she's worked in there. She's lived there. And now she's coordinating, and here she comes.
You must be seeing people in the waiting room or something. Oh, there she is.
There she is.
Hi, Allison.
Allison?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. Got
There
it.
we are.
Hi,
All
everyone.
right. Very good.
Hi there.
We
Well,
can't be sure if it's you until we see you, you know.
That's right. That's right. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jim Wohlgemuth, and Harvey and I, Harvey Bennett is the other old guy there. We have a radio show called the Veterans for Peace Radio Hour. We're both members of Veterans for Peace. It's part of the Pacifica Radio Network. We're also on Spotify and SoundCloud and a variety of different things. And we're just honored to have both you and David here with us tonight to talk about an issue that I don't think is getting nearly enough press. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick, Harvey?
Well, you kind of did it for me, but Jim and I have been doing this radio show. We're in our 6th year. It's a weekly show. So sometimes you can tell we're a little behind the curve a lot of those weeks, but we're lucky to have you two this week. And Allison, I'm almost afraid to ask what time it is where you are.
It's okay. It's 11 a.m.
Oh, good.
Good. Quite civilized compared to what I usually do with these guys.
Right.
Yeah, we sometimes make people get up at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m.
Right.
You try.
Right. So, well, I don't want to keep either of you too long because I know you are very, very, I suspect you're very, very busy. So the way this works is we'll record and then I will edit it down, the audio, and then we'll send it out to all these different platforms. Now, David, you wanted a video copy of this too, right?
If you make a video, I'd love to share it around. If you're not making a video, that's okay. I mean, whatever you guys want to do.
I can do the same.
Okay.
I can share it too.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, you know what what Harvey and I are actually getting ready to do over the next couple of weeks is actually go live on Twitch. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what Twitch is, but they tell me it works. So all I'm going to do is just let it go with that. So, you know, putting together a live show, this will be a good rehearsal and a good first start. So,
you know, Jim, I have a weekly show on Pacifica as well at TalkWorldRadio.org.
Oh, I know.
I use a program called Riverside, and it records audio, video, separate tracks of audio, mixed tracks of audio, and I put it on YouTube and every podcast channel, you know, so maybe Twitch is better. I haven't used Twitch, so I can't compare.
Okay.
All right. Riverside. Okay.
All I know is,
Jim.
Right? All I know is the young people recommended it. So the young people from Veterans for Peace. So
yeah, that's Gamers for Peace use that. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. And so today we have two guests that if you took the time to adequately introduce them, we would be out of time as far as the radio show. We have David Swanson, author, activist, journalist, and radio host. He is executive director of World Beyond War and campaign coordinator of rootsaction.org. His books include War is a Lie and When the World Outlawed War. He blogs at davidswanson.org and warisacrime.org. He hosts Talk World Radio. He is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, And he's on the advisory board of a number of peace organizations, including Veterans for Peace. And thanks to David, we also have Dr. Alison Broinowski. Did I pronounce that right?
It'll do.
Okay.
It'll do.
Perfect. She is acting president of Australians for War Powers Reform. She joined the Australian Foreign Service in 1963. She has lived and served in Japan, Burma, Iran, the Philippines, Jordan, South Korea, the United States, and Mexico. She is the author of 8 books, I believe. She lectures and thankfully has joined us today from Australia. So thanks so much for joining Harvey and me to talk about AUKUS, which stands for Australia, United Kingdom, and United States. That's an agreement between the 3 countries to build nuclear-powered subs in Australia, for Australia. Now, to me, it's way more complex than just building subs, and has a number of, unintended or maybe intended consequences that are not being conveyed, at least not in the press here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with you, Dr. Brownowski, and can I call you Allison?
Yes, please.
Okay. Since your country, Australia, is not only a participant, but also on the front lines of Biden's pivot to Asia, can you tell us your perspective about AUKUS?
Well, Australians are terrific cynics, and no sooner had AUKUS been announced that people reversed the acronym and said it read, "You sucker, Australia." And although the government, I think, thought that it was going to make a huge splash with this thing, and did so particularly in the Murdoch media, which is very dominant in this country, as you can imagine, I don't think that they got nearly the enthusiastic response to it that they expected. Instead, people were cynical in their response. They suspected that there was a great deal that we weren't being told, as you've said, because if you're not being told much, we're being told even less about what this thing contains. It is not a treaty, it's an agreement. It's only an agreement to do a few things to do with military hardware and basing more American troops in Australia, and doing a bit of home porting and things that haven't been done before ever for nuclear submarines and ships. All of this is quite significant, but it doesn't tell us what it's for. It doesn't tell us who the enemy is, take your guess. And it leaves people saying, well, okay, this is all going to arrive certainly after the 4 of us are dead. It's going to leave a huge debt for our grandchildren to pay. And a lot of people are just going, what's all that about? And the real cynics in Australia are saying, if we don't know what this is about, and if the results of it aren't going to be here when we need them, what is all this for? What is all this enormous amount of money for? And the deep, dark cynics immediately reply, to get the government re-elected before next May. As simple as that.
To get the government, so Morrison feels under pressure. Morrison's
under huge pressure. He has a very slender majority. In fact, several of his ministers have just resigned for various reasons, and so he has no majority to play with. He has to put up with the team that he's got. He has to have an election before next May, and he hoped to be able to win that on his management of the coronavirus. But people are unimpressed because he shelved all the blame for various failures to the states while taking no responsibility himself for making sure that we had adequate supplies of everything that we needed. they're scrambling to catch up on that. People are unimpressed and quite frankly, saving your program, pissed off with his performance. And so he's scratching for something to look leader-like about it. And this thing, this AUKUS thing, which was obviously being concocted ever since 2018, short on detail though it is his way of saying, I am the great leader, trust me, I am going to join up with our old Anglo allies and confront China. And as I say, I'll tell you what the opinion polls say in a moment, which is a bit contradictory, but at the moment, it's not working in the sense of getting him great electoral support that I can see.
Okay. I read an article you wrote, I think it was in August, and I'm just going to quote and get you to comment. If Australians ignore the change in the global power balance that is happening before our eyes, we will suffer the consequences. If we can't defeat the Taliban, how will we prevail in a war against China? Our losses will be incomparably greater. Perhaps when they meet in Washington in September, the Prime Minister may wish to ask if President Biden still believes America is back and wants a war with China. But Biden didn't even bother to call Morrison to discuss the Kabul route. So much for our investment in the Afghanistan war, which was supposed to buy us access in Washington. Now, this was before this deal was announced in September. But, you know, with this whole pivot to Asia, I thought that was very precious as far as the situation between Australia and the United States. That if we all can't beat and Harvey and I both know we're both Vietnam veterans. And so if we can't beat under-equipped indigenous armies, how are we going to deal with China?
Well, quite frankly, as you know, America has done, the American Defense Forces have done a lot of war gaming about a potential war in the South China Sea or a potential war over Taiwan. And in all of those scenarios that they set up to see what would happen, the United States loses. And the Pentagon has admitted that several times. So if even before there is a war, the indication is that we would lose it, Sun Tzu would tell you, don't fight it. If you have no chance of winning, don't fight it. And in particular, don't fight a war against a territorial enemy who is fighting their own home ground. Whereas all America would be doing would be trying to assert its hegemony out into the East Asian and Pacific area. Now, this puts Australia in a very different position, you see, because all of the wars that we have fought alongside you guys and lost, we have fought in other remote places. This time, if we are muscling up for a war against China, one from which we would be very hard put to extricate ourselves because of our interoperability, which is so close, we would lose it. And that is very serious for Australia, because what I think is that China, one of China's plans for such an event would be to make an example out of Australia. Australia doesn't matter. As far as China is concerned, and they have said so explicitly, China is big. Australia is small. But their real problem is with the United States. So making an example out of Australia by doing a devastating attack on, say, US bases in Australia, carefully targeted, make a big impact, make a big hole, would be devastating for us, but not for anybody else. And we, or I at least, would not expect the United States to take the huge risk of going to war with China over that. In other words, Australia is dispensable.
That, you know, that is a real doomsday scenario. But I was thinking about that myself earlier today. What if we, the bunch of us, managed to make China so uncomfortable that they attack Australia? Would the American people come rushing to Australia's aid? And David, what do you think in that case?
I can't speak for the US public, which will answer polls dramatically opposite answers depending on exactly how it's worded. But I think the US government and certain madmen within the US government and the US weapons industry and the profit motive that I think drives this whole thing even more than the electoral concerns of Australian politicians would push to make a devastating attack on Australia a devastating attack on the entire globe. It would be a reason for war on China, I'm afraid. I don't want to have to, get to that point and find out who's right and who's wrong. I don't want Australia to be bombed, but I'm afraid chances are more than even that a Chinese attack on Australia, without this being a concern or even a decision that's already been made, just the momentum, because there would be U.S. troops in Australia who would die. There would be U.S. weapons that would be destroyed. I would love for this calculation of a politician to backfire and for that to be the lesson that's taught, that when you make yourself a vassal state to U.S. empire and you buy U.S. weapons, which means U.S. personnel servicing those weapons, the U.S. military overseeing your military, you're not making yourself a big macho man. You're making yourself a servant to an empire that does you not a darn bit of good. And when we look at the war in Afghanistan, you got the United States doing what it wants, stupidly, illegally, devastating consequences, and absolutely no accountability. Who's left out of the investigation at the International Criminal Court? The United States. But it's junior partners. It's ridiculously junior partners. It's token number of troop junior partners there exclusively to make it somehow legitimate by making it a bigger criminal gang engaged in the operation. They've generated terrorist attacks and threats back home in their own countries in exact proportion to how many troops they sent to participate in Australia. So what lesson is to be learned, right? There are countries like Australia and the United Kingdom, both of them in this new, USUCA alliance that have some, remnants of respect for the rule of law, that may hold some people accountable within their own militaries, whereas the United States doesn't, right? So you're getting into a war for somebody who's going to kick you around, use you as a pseudo legalization, legitimation of the war, allow you to be held accountable even by international bodies, whereas they won't. And is putting troops in your country and weapons and the people to oversee the weapons in your country for its own interests. They have nothing to do with your interests, or China is your biggest trading partner. And you're going to start a war on China to protect your trade routes with China. It's madness. And you have a report out this week from the Congressional Research Office with 3 different ways that the U.S. military could cut $1 trillion and be just fine by its own standards, its own stated goals. And you have Congress increasing military spending while supposedly ending the wars. This is not the exclusive, single explanation of everything, but this is a major motivating factor here. There are a small number of people getting stinking rich at the expense of the rest of us. And the politicians they're major players, but they're not the core of the problem.
Allison, are there people in Australia getting rich too?
Not many. Well, some are, but not from this sort of stuff. We are the buyers of all the awful stuff that David just described.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when our Prime Minister, Morrison, met together with your president, Joe Biden, and with Boris Johnson at the G8 meeting, that's why they had a little meeting of their own, the three of them, which Johnson gatecrashed. It was supposed to be one-on-one between the president and Morrison. Johnson gatecrashed that because they were having a party, because Australia had signed up to pay all the costs of the party, buy all the drinks and caviar, and they were delighted. And that was it. They signed and sealed it at that meeting. And Morrison came home and announced it. No wonder they were laughing. They are the ones who are making all the money. It's British and American weaponry, technology, and every other possible thing. Servicing, fuel, the lot. We don't have a uranium industry in Australia. We dig uranium out of the ground and sell it, but we don't refine it at all. And one suspicion I have, over and above the earlier one that I mentioned to you about our next election, the other suspicion I have is that part of the purpose in Australia of certain people who are rich, as you say, and perhaps are seeking to enrich themselves even further, are the uranium industry people who have been pushing for a long time for nuclear power in Australia, a nuclear industry in Australia, claiming that this would do the job for climate change. Well, it wouldn't, because we'd have to have 50 nuclear power plants all around the coast of the country where nobody would want them. Secondly, they would cost an arm and a leg. And thirdly, they wouldn't be built in time to make any significant impact on climate change at all. So we're better off without them and without the huge debt that we would incur in building them. But these guys would not incur the debt. These are the guys who would become filthy rich, as you say. And that, I do suspect, is one of the push factors behind Morrison's decision to announce this thing.
Okay. There's two things. First of all, I was reading an article where they mentioned just what you were mentioning about a nuclear industry there. And one of the authors actually led to the idea, well, it could establish a nuclear industry, but it could also lead to Australia enriching enough uranium to actually end up making nuclear weapons. Would you see that happening at all?
Well, that would be exactly the consequence. And I'm sure that the people who want this to happen have that in mind. And that's one of the reasons why this nuclear element of the submarines has been introduced. 5 or 6 years ago, when they originally made the agreement with France, France was offering to build nuclear submarines, which they have, build them with using low enriched uranium rather than high, build those in Australia. And Australia at that time said, well, we'd like your submarines, but sorry, we can't do the nuclear bit. So we want you to retrofit them to have ordinary diesel engines. That is one of the reasons why it's taken such a long time and why this project has been so expensive and so unproductive. And the French are correct in being very annoyed because they offered a nuclear submarine in the first place and we turned it down. I mean, we couldn't have shot ourselves in both feet better than what we have done. And that's what we've got. We can't walk.
And Allison, this is the big opposition that we hear about in the U.S. media to this mad warmongering idea is the opposition from the French, who want to sell more French mad war weapons, right? There's no voice of sanity. There's no opposition to the nuclear subs. There's no questioning of the sub that they just crashed into. They won't say what in the South China Sea, that they won't even call the South China Sea. And we were never asked. The U.S. public was never asked about any of this. Hardly been told about it.
And we were not asked. It was a complete surprise to us, complete surprise to the French. And you can understand why they're annoyed about that. And the Germans, who were supplying some components of all this. I mean, if our Prime Minister had set out to make enemies out of all our friends and worse enemies out of our enemies, he couldn't have done it better. But I just wanted to say there is one exception to all this stupidity, and it's always the same. New Zealand is always on the side of the angels, and they're always critical of us.
Because I understand New Zealand says, go ahead and do this. You'll never port in any of our harbors again. So what's the attitude throughout the rest of the Asia Pacific countries? Are they for this? Are some for this? Are some against it?
The only well, it breaks down into for and against, as you say. The Japanese, with a new prime minister, we're not too sure, but he is conservative, and the Japanese, we think, are going to be saying, we want some of that, right?
So they want nuclear subs too. Yeah.
And the South Koreans have expressed a lot of alarm. They have been trying to open up a bit more, get a bit more openness with the North. And so this has come at a very bad time for them if there are more tensions in the region. But India, on the other hand, member of the new revived Quad, would also like to get nuclear submarines. So they're a bit annoyed, thinking that it's a white allied plot, which it is. Further into the region, the Indonesians and the Malaysians have expressed polite reservations about what's going on. They are always, the ASEAN countries are always concerned about great power rivalry crushing in on their community of 11 nations. And the only way they can exercise any influence is by hanging together. So they do that. And so anti-nuclear sentiment is strong within the ASEAN. Singapore is the only one I know of that has said, well, it's not all that bad an idea. Don't forget that Singapore services American nuclear submarines in its ports. So they're not purer than the driven snow, the Singaporeans. They're very pragmatic. And they also have a balancing act that they conduct with China, as the whole of ASEAN does. And that, quite frankly, is what we have been doing up to now, until we threw our hat quite clearly into the anti-China ring. I mean, only 3 or 4 years ago, we were saying all sorts of nice things about China and having all kinds of positive initiatives going on. And something, 2018, 17, something changed that we weren't told about. It may have been what we do know about, which is the decision by Xi Jinping to be much more upfront and not to be pushed around anymore and just say what he thinks and get on this warrior track and have the foreign ministry people being much less polite than they used to be in the past. And then, of course, it's a question of who then reacted first. Was it us? Were they reacting to us refusing to go along with Huawei or the Belt and Road and all of this sort of thing? Or was it us reacting to them? And there are people in Australia, there are policy people in Australia who have been for several years advocating pushback against Chinese. We can't be pushed around like this. We've got to show them. With what? You know?
Mm-hmm.
and the folly of this is so clear to people like me. Earlier, I was going to say to you what the polls are saying, which is really quite surprising. I'm in touch, as you can imagine, with all sorts of people who agree with things I've just been saying, and they're all horrified as I am, and all kinds of new initiatives are being taken to protest against this thing, and petitions written, and protests held, and all that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, there have been a couple of alarming public opinion polls done, small in their range of people consulted, certainly, but a little bit worrying because 81% said that they thought that this new AUKUS thing would make Australia more secure. Can you imagine? More, not less, but more. That is how some people apparently think, those polled think. Secondly, there was another poll by a quite reputable think tank here, in which they found that the opinions of Australians about China over the last 2 or 3 years are completely reversed. In other words, we used to see China as a great trading neighbor, terrific for tourism and students, and saved us from the global financial crisis, all that sort of stuff. Those opinions were around. But now that is completely reversed. And instead of 30% seeing China as untrustworthy, over 60% now see China as an untrustworthy country, which shows you how consent can be manufactured, as Chomsky said.
Well, you just mentioned that, you just mentioned Murdoch. And of course, we have Murdoch here with regard to Fox News, and we know how they can manipulate.
He's an American. He's an agent of foreign influence.
Yes. So is that where this change came about? Tell me we're rattling sabers with China, but we still trade. You can't go to Lowe's and get anything that's American made anymore, almost. Is it Murdoch? Is it the media?
It's partly Murdoch. There are other media, both in your country and mine, that are certainly not taking a very strong line on this. Murdoch has a lot on his, ought to have a lot on his conscience for the state of the world right now. The way they pushed the war on terror for 20 years and made people believe that they were in danger of terrorism, whereas in fact, they're much more in danger if they cross the road, much more in danger of guns, for instance, than terrorism. Yeah. All of that. But you see, terrorism sells newspapers, sells television. It's very sensational. It works a charm. And what I argue in my new book is that the terrorists know that too. So both the militarists, that includes Murdoch, the militarists and the terrorists are in a vicious circle, one stimulating the other to attack. And the more one attacks the other, the more it generates the very military industrial surveillance complex that we have and provides the money. And that's why it keeps going. And Murdoch is complicit in that. He's not the only factor, but he's a big one.
Okay. Well, what's the name of your new book? We can promote it here.
Sorry?
What's the name of your new book so we can promote it here?
Well, I've been writing it for 4 years, can you imagine? Because things keep changing and I have to keep going back and fixing it up.
Right.
But it's called Worse Than Terror.
Worse Than Terror.
And of course, the final act on which the curtain comes down is the pandemic and climate change.
Yeah.
And those are worse than terror.
Mm-hmm.
Worse than terror. All right. Now, David, I want to turn to you because I was reading an article you wrote, I think it was last November. It was about Pearl Harbor. And there was a paragraph in there in which you mentioned Obama. And I see AUKUS as part of this pivot to Asia. And you say there, the Asia pivot of the Obama-Trump era had the precedent in the years leading up to World War II, as the United States and Japan built up their military presence in the Pacific. The United States was aiding China in the war against Japan and blockading Japan to deprive it of critical resources prior to Japan's attack on US troops and imperial territories. So there's the lead up to World War II. Do you see any parallels with what's going on right now?
I see parallels, and I see parallels in the propaganda, and I see, in fact, direct reliance on World War II propaganda. Hillary Clinton's view that the United States owns the Pacific because it liberated it and bought it, and the South China Sea has no business having China in its name because the whole place belongs to the United States. It comes out of World War II mythology, and I think it's important to recognize that here in the United States, the polls have done the exact same thing that Allison describes in Australia. The shift toward distrusting China, hating China, has been dramatic just in recent years. And nobody, is as disgusted with Fox News as I am, but there is not a single media outlet in the United States of any major size where you can find views about cooperating with China, collaborating with China, teaming up with China to address the real problems of the climate and the nukes and the environmental destruction. This is bipartisan. This is Congress, both houses, both parties, all media. And it's absolutely stunning, the power of this propaganda. These communications machines that can make you believe that war doesn't cost money, that these other bills that they're talking about are the biggest bills ever, the reconciliation bill, when they're so small compared to war spending, that U.S. deaths are a major percentage of the deaths in these wars, that the Iraqis are grateful for what's been done to their country. I mean, this is stuff that people believe because of the power of propaganda that Iran or Russia or China, they can change it on a dime, is the big threat to peace in the world. And leading up in the decades prior to World War II, China was thought of as an enemy, and Japan was the big ally and the real, sort of junior partner, almost white people in Asia. And they flipped it. They switched it. And Chinese propaganda in New York City combined with the US own propaganda, they flipped it and they made Japan the enemy and China the good guys. And yes, the United States was providing airplanes and pilots and training and guidance to China prior to Pearl Harbor, while we have this mythology of the United States, standing by, out of the picture, innocent, attacked out of the blue for no earthly reason. The United States was blockading Japan, was sanctioning Japan, was running through a list of proposals they'd come up with how to provoke Japan, so that you had one of the jurists happened to be from India at the War Crimes Tribunal in Tokyo, concluding that the United States had provoked Japan. Doesn't make anything Japan did legal, moral, practical, acceptable in any way, shape, or form. But it does give you a more accurate picture. I mean, people like you and I, those of us on this call, if we had been around in the 30s and the 40s, we would have been joining in marches against the looming war between the United States and Japan, and the inevitable, predictable, explicit, open, public build up to war by both sides. So this mythology that we have today, where the United States was, busy tending its farms, and out of a clear blue sky, Japan attacked for no reason, is just bunk that's been sold to us by very skillful salespeople.
Well, that's not real optimistic, is it? So, I guess the next place that I want to go is, how is China feeling? Does anybody have an idea about how China is feeling? I mean, other than the fact that they just sent 15 to 20 fighters towards Taiwan. And they just announced last week during their Nationalism Day or something like that, yeah, one day Taiwan's going to be part of the fold again. I mean, what's your insights as far as how China feels?
Well, can I answer that briefly?
Please.
The fact is, Taiwan is part of China. The United States recognizes that, and so do we. And so does international law, and so does the United Nations. I mean, the only thing that is unclear is when China is going to, if it is, assert that territoriality and say, okay, Taiwan is now going to be as much under Chinese control, say, as Hong Kong is. Now, the Taiwanese know this perfectly well. And for years, for decades, they've been playing the United States off against communist China. And every time they get the opportunity, they rev that up. The overflight the other day was publicized everywhere, and everyone went, oh, they're attacking Taiwan. It was the usual flyover that they always do on Taiwan's National Day, just to say, don't forget, we are here. We're just reminding you. We're not attacking you, but we're just saying, don't push it any further. Don't assume that we've forgotten, that you belong to us, and just remember it. I mean, you know, when David talks about how we got conned over World War II, this is a con too. It's the same con. Here, this poor little gallant democratic Taiwan fighting for its independence, you know, like hell. We don't even regard it as a separate country. And people should understand that and get their heads around it. And if we're going to change that, that's a whole nother story. And changing it by war is the worst possible way I could think of going about it, partly because the people of Taiwan would suffer even more than I was just describing what would happen to Australia.
The way they describe these flights, they act like it's in Taiwanese airspace. It's not. None of it's in Taiwanese airspace.
I think the people of Taiwan should have the right to vote what country they want to be a part of. But when your government in the United States treats such a vote by the people of Crimea as the biggest threat to the rule of law and peace and prosperity in the past 30 years and exactly. threatens World War III in Europe over it, you're not in a position to say, we want to stand up for the rule of law and defend the rights of people to self-determination everywhere, when you're the biggest holdout on human rights treaties and biggest enemy of international bodies, courts and legal bodies in the world, and your solution is nuclear submarines. It just doesn't work.
Well, and David, can I just add to that too? It's not only Taiwan that fits that description. What about Diego Garcia? What about the people the Chogasians, who have been expelled from the island of Diego Garcia? And they would like their country back. Are they getting their country back? No way. What about the people of West Papua who don't want to be part of Indonesia? Who is going to bat for the people of West Papua who are subject to human rights abuses all day, every day by the Indonesian military? And human rights, which Joe Biden says is one of his main, he said before he was elected, it would be one of his main issues. He said, I will play the human rights card.
It's a game. It's a game
and
to
that's
him.
What I have to say, leaders with something on their conscience always do.
So, all right. That's extraordinary. There was something else on my list I wanted to ask, and there's no segue, so I'll just ask it. I read a number of folks who were saying that what we're doing, this AUKUS, could be a violation of the non-proliferation treaty of the late 1960s. How do both of you see that? And ladies first.
It's okay.
I'm not the lady. I don't think.
You do the MPT.
Okay, David, NPT.
Well, there are numerous, I think, pretty clear violations of it, including the United States keeping nuclear weapons in 3 countries in Europe. And so if you're not allowed to proliferate nuclear weapons to other countries, then you have a very clear violation. And if you're not allowed, I think Allison may have more expertise than I here, but certainly under various US laws, you're not supposed to share nuclear technologies with other countries. And Trump even almost sort of got in trouble if the Congress had any nerve over his efforts to share nuclear technology with the Saudis. And if you're putting weaponry in Australia and you're sending in your people to work in partnership with the Australian people on maintaining and upgrading and fixing the inevitable disasters with this god-awful technology, which is made unreliably and deficiently because there's no accountability in the whole industry, well, then you're sharing nuclear technologies with Australia. And there's no question that other countries under this insane system, as we've already touched on, want to get nuclear technology for the purpose of getting closer to getting nuclear weapons. I mean, we've known that numerous countries have developed nuclear energy in order to be closer to developing nuclear weapons. We've had the US government threatening war on Iran for supposedly doing this for years and years, right? So it's absolute madness to be doing anything with nuclear anything. And whether or not there's a clear violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, there's an obvious violation of a new treaty created just a few years ago that the majority of nations on Earth are now joining on to ban the possession, manufacture, trading of any nuclear weapons. And so, that's where, not nuclear energy, but nuclear weapons. And that's where we have to be. That's where we have to get. The US government is miles away from it. But this is what, if you're going to hold democracy summits and teach the world about democracy, and most of the world wants to ban nuclear weapons and weapons in space and cyber weapons and all of the kinds of weapons that you're just devoting your heart and soul to, then, shut up about democracy.
So that is why when you had these 3 leaders, Morrison, Johnson, and Biden, announcing this whole plan, that's why they all started to trip over themselves by saying, this is not nuclear weapons. This is not nuclear weapons. So they must have known in their heart of hearts and somewhere in their brains that, no, this is going to be a violation, or they wouldn't have been protesting so much.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's right. And that's why what they put out, these 2 statements, are so short on detail. And, if they were planning this thing since 2018, it certainly doesn't show in the detail of what they've published. It looks like a little slim statement with no detail at all. But the nuclear issue is, as you say, at the heart of it. As I've said earlier, I believe there are people in Australia who want that to happen. And the reason that Australia will not sign or ratify the nuclear ban treaty that David was just talking about, banning all nuclear weapons, which so many other countries have already signed. The reason Australia will not do so is because our government says that to do so would compromise our reliance on protection of the United States nuclear umbrella. You see, because it would, because we would have to then say we will not abide any kind of defense by nuclear weapons, which is precisely the point of the treaty. So that if all the countries in the world agreed to it, we could get rid of this stuff. But one of the other lurking unmentionables about it is that the United States particularly, has gone on and on about Iran, and all sorts of efforts have been made to stop Iran developing nuclear power and possibly nuclear weapons. But look at Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody ever talks about what Israel has got or how they got it. They got it from the United States. Where else? That's why Israel has an unknown number of nuclear weapons, with which they threaten Iran all the time, which is the reason why Iran wants its own nuclear power to offset that threat, quite understandably. And the hypocrisy of the 5 nuclear powers in the United Nations, in the Security Council, on this issue is indescribable. And we meekly go along with it. Remember what Henry Kissinger said? It's a dangerous thing to be America's enemy, but it's much worse to be its friend.
It's much worse to be its friend. And that, that's something I must be just on overload as far as my naivete, because I was thinking, well, I thought this after Vietnam. Nobody's going to trust us. Nobody's going to rely on us. Look at what happened in Vietnam. We leave with our tail between our legs, and that country is still suffering from our armament from Agent Orange, but yet they're unified. And now we do the same thing with Afghanistan, and Iraq is just sitting off there. I don't even know what the status is in Iraq anymore. But I just don't understand why countries like Australia, like the UK, like any of these countries actually get on board with what we're doing, because it seems like a road to hell.
I think we should be.
Allow me to give you a suggestion.
Okay.
Canada, for instance, doesn't have to face up to this because they're actually under the umbrella. They really are. So they don't have to take principled lines on it. They can take principled positions about other things. And they do. But people like countries like Australia and New Zealand are in quite a different position. We have to look after our own defense. If we don't do so independently, we are sucked into America's wars, which is what's happened to us, but not to New Zealanders because they refuse. And it is in our interest. This is seems to me, the only recourse that Australia has now is to make it clear to the United States that if there was to be a war against China over whatever, Australia would not join a US-led coalition, because the US always wants a coalition, right? It's part of the justification for Congress, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if Australia had the guts to say, hell no, we won't go, going back to your Vietnam days, we are not interested in joining a coalition to fight in a war that we would lose, and a war that could become a nuclear war. If we said that, there would be disbelief in Australia, but there would be shock horror in Washington. Now, why, you say, don't countries like mine do that, what I've just recommended? I'll tell you why. Because they know from experience, and we know from 1975, what happened here, that a government that does that to the United States can find itself destabilized, out of government, and sometimes its leaders can find themselves dead.
Yeah, ask Salvador Allende.
Indeed.
So, David, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think the key, I agree 100% with what Allison has just said. I think the key here is not to be thinking about countries and, why would countries do this and what does China feel, but to be thinking of governments, which have almost nothing in common with the people who live in the countries that we call countries, and which are increasingly corrupt all over the world, corrupted internally and corrupted by foreign influence, including the US government influence. I mean, we at WorldBeyondWar.org, we have a petition that says, don't get yanked into a war on China, that we're getting thousands and thousands of signatures from around the world and taking to governments around the world and saying, don't do exactly what Allison just recommended. Say, we will not be part of your gang in a war on China or in threatening a war on China. And people are signing it. People are signing it in Australia, but they aren't the Australian government, which does not represent the Australian people any better than the US government represents the US people. It just, I wouldn't look for logic or morality or anthropomorphize these governments. I mean, they're made up of people, but their institutions and their interests are extremely corrupt and perverted. You just can't expect them to behave sensibly. You have to demand and pressure them to behave sensibly.
So, okay, we've kept you both for almost an hour, and I wanted to make sure we got this in. Is there anything? David just promoted World Beyond War website and the petition. Allison, David, is there anything else that you want to promote that we can share with our audience? Because you both are so there's such an enlightenment here with regard to the actual reality beyond AUKUS that I want to give people a chance to follow you and to keep up with what you're doing. Allison, go ahead.
Okay. There's one thing in particular that's happening in Australia. There's an organization called IPAN. Now, ICAN is the Australian group that did the nuclear treaty, but IPAN is the Independent Peace and Peaceful Australia Network. And they're very active. They're growing all the time. They've got a lot of members all over the country. And I've recently put them through David in touch with World Beyond War and others. And they're doing a major campaign on the AUKUS thing right now that's just getting going. That will result in protests to the government and so on. This is something we do actually, perhaps more than you do. We get our protests up and then we take them direct to, we go and see these members of parliament and blockade them in their offices and make them talk to us. And at the moment, we've got another thing that is run by Michael West Media. Michael West Media is an online site, and they are interviewing every single federal politician and saying to them, do you support reform of the war powers? Our war powers need reform like yours. And recording the responses of each and every one of these politicians, including the ones who say no comment. So when all that comes out, we're going to publish the results. We're going to name and shame them. And we're going to, potentially the objective is, if there's a war, these people will have to go back to their electorates and be held responsible for what they did.
And that was IPAN.
IPAN, that's one thing. And Michael West Media is the other.
West Media.
David's got the details for IPAN, or I can send them.
Okay, all right. And David, where can people get in touch with you? And I know you have affiliates throughout the country. How does my Veterans for Peace chapter? How does Harvey and my Veterans for Peace chapter become an affiliate?
You talk to me and talk to our organizing director, Greta Zorro, about, or just click the link at WorldBeyondWar.org for how to become an affiliate, and we can work with you on it. Numerous Veterans for Peace chapters in various countries are affiliates and allies in various ways with World Beyond War. And I wanted to mention that we're working on something that I think we were inspired by Veterans for Peace years years ago to take up that's relevant to all of these countries in the AUKUS or USUCA alliance, and that is the problem of what's been done to Armistice Day, now Veterans Day, and Remembrance Day. And if you go to WorldBeyondWar.org, you'll also find all kinds of information, including links to Veterans for Peace about November 11th. And we're planning an event on November 4th online with some speakers from Veterans for Peace from the US and from the UK, and some speakers from New Zealand, in fact, and Canada and elsewhere, to try to make some positive, peaceful use of what used to be a peaceful holiday and has now been turned into a war holiday. Yeah, we've got chapters and affiliates all over the world, not just any particular country, but we love working with Vets for Peace.
All right. Yeah. Veterans for Peace. Veterans Day, celebrating militarism since 1953, 54, something like that.
Yeah, but for 30 years before that, it was Armistice Day.
Exactly.
Right.
A day to celebrate peace. So, all right. Okay. Anything that you both want to say that you didn't get to say because I didn't ask the right question?
I'm just wondering if Harvey's got anything that he would like to. I'm sure that he's got all sorts of responses to what we've been saying. Can you let us have them, Harvey?
Well, I wish I felt qualified. I've learned a lot listening. I spent the whole day at the People versus Fossil Fuels indigenous event here in DC. I made myself a press pass for Veterans for Peace. So my head's been full of all that. I just got here about 15 minutes before the Zoom started, so I apologize for being a bump on a log.
So but officially you were on assignment.
That's right.
So
it's like walking and chewing gum, though. At my age, I can't do more than one thing at a time.
Right.
Well, I was talking earlier today with a veteran for peace in Scotland who's going to be working with us in Glasgow at the COP26
That's exciting.
conference in early November, which we've got a petition we're taking to deliver over there.
Are you going to Glasgow, David?
I'm not going. We have World Beyond War folks in Europe. It makes more sense for them to go. There are quite a lot of people actually going and or participating virtually from the United States. And people are doing events around November 6th all over the world. And if you look at cop26.info, you'll see dozens of Veterans for Peace groups have signed that petition. And we're hoping to try to at least wake people up to the fact that one of the biggest destroyers of the climate is silently left out of all the climate agreements.
Yes.
Exactly. The U.S. military. Good Lord.
All the militaries.
All the militaries.
Nice.
Yeah. We normally end our show with a song. Well, we always do. I don't know why I say normally, but we end our show with a song that relates to what we've been talking about on the show. Does anybody have a recommendation for a song? Something that
Waltzing Matilda.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Oh.
We have a collection of every good anti-war song we've ever found at worldbeyondwar.org/music.
We have a group aging now in Australia called Men at Work, and they've got a great song called "Beds Are Burning." How can we sleep when the world keeps turning? How can we sleep when our beds are?
Wow.
Okay.
Yep.
That sounds great.
All right. Yeah. David, if you don't mind, we'll go with that one.
Oh, I love that song. Yeah, I know every song that came out when I was in high school. That's good music.
That's right. So, all right. Well, last thing, David, is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't get to?
I don't think so. Thanks very much.
And Allison, anything that you want to say that we didn't get to?
I've said as much as I should, I think. Thank you.
That's awesome. So, do you mind if we get back in touch with you? Would you both later on, and let's update this stuff? And we're Harvey and I and Veterans for Peace is trying to point out how this saber rattling with China is not productive. And despite what Hillary Clinton says, it is still the South China Sea. So if we can reach out later on to get your input, we'd appreciate it. So, well,
sounds great.
All right. So we will let you go. And thanks so much. Oh, what I'll do is I will do some editing. I will send you the audio. I will also try and send you the video so that you can share. And Harvey, any last words of appreciation?
Oh, this was great. Thank you, David and Allison, for just doing a terrific job of giving us a good show. Love it.
Giving us a good update on what's going on here.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Allison,
thank you for having us.
Wonderful.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Allison.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that was good.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get to look at your email with the attachment. I might have had something to say.
Well, that's all right. No, that's all right. I got it to you late because I was working and tinkering on it all day. And
you've obviously been doing a lot of prep for this one. That's great.
Yeah. I listened to that whole series, that Zoom week before last, and then there was a long article put out by this organization, APLN, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they went through what is the view from Vietnam, what is the view from Australia, what is the view from, and I had all these questions lined up for Allison, but she ended up answering them as we went. So I didn't really have to ask too much.
Yeah, she was wonderful.
Yeah.
David's always good.
David's always good.
He tends to have the same message, but it's a good message.
Yeah, that's right.
But, it was wonderful to see her, hear her view of how all this is playing out in Australia and the politics of that.
Exactly.